I know the death of the ACC. The ACC is dying. Okay. I don't disagree with you on that. Now, what have we told you on this show about the ACC and the situation with the ACC, and that the ACC Conference essentially lives and dies on Tobacco Road with North Carolina and Duke? And really, I think North Carolina is the power player in this league, not Florida State, not Clemson in their NIL with Jesus. No, it is North Carolina. And the fact that North Carolina and North Carolina State are not tied at the hip. We've told you that repeatedly. We've had this discussion on the show. Wolfpack Nation has come into the comments section all pissed off as though they were Oregon State fan and repeatedly said, oh, we're going where North Carolina goes. Well, I got news for you. According to the lawmakers in North Carolina, apparently they don't believe that North Carolina and North Carolina State are tied at the hip, because new legislation being introduced in the state of North Carolina would make it mandatory for NC State and North Carolina to play each other every single season, and would tie NC State and North Carolina to the other colleges in the state of North Carolina. Oh, and why would you be doing that? Because obviously they believe that the ACC is going away. The news here is that NC State and North Carolina are not tied together, as we've been telling you now for months and months and months. They're not tied together. There is no indication that there will be a calamony situation when North Carolina eventually ends up in the Big Ten, which is where I think they will end up. But what does this situation tell us about what's going on in the ACC? I think it tells you that conversations continue to be ongoing. And I think when you look at the situation in the ACC, it remains to be unstable. I don't think anybody is in a hurry. In fact, it's not going to be weeks when we will get an answer. I think it will still be several months. And here we are on June 5th of 2024. I think we are at least 6 weeks away, minimum 6 weeks away from getting any kind of end game solution to what's going on in the in the ACC rather. But Jake, I think this situation in North Carolina tells you that the wheels are moving behind the scenes, and we are heading ultimately for the end of the ACC.
Absolutely. And I think that, you make a perfect point. Like, you wouldn't be doing this if the ACC was going to be around and these two were going to continue to be in the same conference. And I think that that's the overreaching point. And I think that, people learned a lot of lessons out of the Pac-12 situation. And I think that's why local legislature is getting involved now instead of waiting for the conference to melt down. Because if you can get ahead of this thing and you can say, okay, cool, like we're essentially mandating that these schools inside our state line continue to play each other every single year, we will be largely unaffected by realignment and by the ACC melting down. And that's basically all the state cares about. The state just wants to make sure that it continues to have its revenue, that it continues to have a strong, obviously, educational system, and that its schools continue to flourish and thrive. And so I think this is smart out of the local legislature. I think it is saying, hey, we saw what happened. We don't want to be in a bad position. So we're going to get ahead of this thing and mitigate. And we're going to start to say, okay, we learned the lesson. So to me, that's where I say, hey, people are starting to learn lessons, and they're starting to embrace the fact that the sport is changing.
Yeah, and I think you see here that, and I believe this is Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports, under a bill filed by prominent Republican House members, UNC and NC State would be required to play at least one of East Carolina, Appy State, Charlotte every year, and would have to play each school home and away every 6 years. And North Carolina lawmakers want to require the state two biggest universities, UNC and NC State, to regularly play football and basketball games against each other, other in-state public schools, as well as against each other. And you look at the rationale for this, UNC and NC State would also be required to play each other home and away every year a nod to the looming realignment that could move the longtime rivals into separate conferences. Are you serious, Monty?
Oh.
Wait, but I thought they were, Jake, they were tied. They're tied together.
Hold on, bro. Like,
yeah, like, hold on, bruh. I don't think there's any doubt that A, I'm good looking, and B, I'm fatter than Tua. But that we were
like the fat kid loves cake.
Yeah, that we are absolutely correct on North Carolina and NC State are not going to be required to move together. And you look at the answer here, sports tourism is vital to the economy in North Carolina, and interstate collegiate athletics generate millions of dollars in economic impact for the state. Yeah, North Carolina is a state that thrives in the college landscape.
Yeah, and that's why you're getting legislature on this. That's what I'm saying. Like for the local legislature, right at the state level, all you have to do here is make sure, hey, the revenue stays inside the state lines. Like whether you're playing for the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, your mom's league, I don't care what league, but you guys have to play each other every single year because we need people to buy tickets and buy beer and tailgate and power the local economy. And that's where I say this is really smart and pragmatic. And I'm telling you that people in that town are not stupid. They see, hey, there's opportunity to raise revenue coming down the pipe. Now, it may take a couple of years, but we're going to be prepared for that change. We are not going to allow our economy and our dollars to be affected by the decisions of folks who lead college athletics. Like, let them do their thing, but you damn sure are going to play these games.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the ACC, I think we are looking at a situation where there is a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. And I go back to what we've reported on this show that the Big 12 has, in fact, spoken to the majority of ACC membership, including Duke and North Carolina. I think that the ACC meltdown here and the looming meltdown is a real opportunity for the Big 12. And when we talk about those that could benefit substantially from the ACC going away, I don't think there's any doubt that it appears the big winner of that would be the Big 12. Now, are you going to end up with a Florida State? No, you're probably not. I maintain that Florida State's only avenue out of the ACC would, in fact, be the SEC, because there's no easy fit for Florida State in the Big Ten. I think that I look at North Carolina. North Carolina is going to the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
I look at Notre Dame. Notre Dame, if that conference melts down in totality, I think if it melts down altogether, Notre Dame ends up in the Big Ten. It's the only conference that they would join, in my opinion. I think the SEC would make a hard pitch for Notre Dame, but I don't see Notre Dame going anywhere but the Big Ten. I've been told that repeatedly. But I think when you look at the Virginia schools, you look at Louisville, I think Miami is a very, very interesting player in the ACC landscape, the silent killer, because I think that's what Miami is. As much of a dumpster fire as Miami athletics has been for decades now, as much as I believe that corruption rules the day in the city of Miami, in my opinion, I think that Miami still is a very valuable brand. And if the Big 12 can end up with a foothold in Central and Southern Florida, that would be a major coup. And I think you look at where the Big 12 is now. I have been told repeatedly the most likely members of the ACC to join the Big 12 are the the Virginia schools, Virginia and Virginia Tech, Miami and Louisville. Those four have been repeatedly and consistently contacted and in contact with members of the Big 12 and with their, let's call them emissaries.
Right.
I think that you look at those four universities, and I think there's a hell of a lot more in play there. Very clearly, I think Pitt is a valuable property if you are the Big 12. I think it brings you a phenomenal rival with West Virginia. I think it brings you one of the marquee football matchups of the year in that game. I think it gives you regionality. I think Pitt makes a lot of sense. But I think, based on what I've been told, the Virginia schools, Louisville, and Miami are the focus for the Big 12. They have had consistent contact with Duke. I don't think Duke is a realistic option for the Big 12. I think Duke is a Big 10 school. I think Duke wants to be in business with North Carolina. I think North Carolina wants to be in business with the brands that are in the Big 10. And I think North Carolina and Duke understand the minute that they join the Big 10, they're going in as full-fledged financial members, and they immediately become national championship caliber programs in college basketball because they would absolutely be the biggest brands in that conference in basketball. And I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I think they would have a lot of leverage over the Big Ten at that point too. Like because like right now, if you're UNC and Duke in the ACC, you have leverage because you are UNC and Duke, and like you bring all those basketball shares. And obviously, Duke's had a year here or a year there on the football field where they've improved, but obviously Duke is, clearly a basketball school. UNC, on the other hand, I think has seen more gains on the football field. I think UNC has done a really good job growing that side of their business. And obviously still a lot of room to grow, right? Still a lot of room for improvement. Still got to turn yourself into a regular player in the college football playoff. But I think from a basketball perspective, the Big Ten needs basketball powerhouses. UNC and Duke can provide that. And if you're UNC and Duke, I think you can feel really good about the fact that, hey, like we would still be in a position where we can say, yeah, like we are part of the reason your conference is making huge money. And I think that's going to be for them really important. And then for the Big 12, I think the Big 12's place in college athletics is going to be really interesting because I think that definition is going to change as we move along here.
No,
now,
I agree with that.
Like right now, the ACC, I would say in order, like totem pole order, we've got SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12. Like I think that's kind of your order of prominence. But if the Big 12 is the conference that picks up the second cut of team out of the ACC, and the Big 10's getting obviously the top players, I think the Big 12's role in all of this is crucial because you have to have somewhere for these schools to go. And obviously they're not going to a Pac-12 conference that doesn't exist. And so the Big 12 turns into this conference that is like, hey, we're going to ingest what is left of the ACC, and we're going to provide balance and scheduling to the bigger picture. Because obviously the Big 12 is a strong basketball conference that you can do great things in scheduling with. Yeah. They need, in my opinion, to improve in football. We've talked about that at length. But again, I'm just telling you, only having two conferences in college athletics isn't going to work. You need that third player to kind of round the picture out. And that's where I think you're going to find really strong balance in the sport once the ACC does whatever they're going to do.
Well, I'm really curious to see where the lesser brands in the ACC end up, the Boston colleges, the Syracuse. I think one of the more interesting brands in that conference is Wake Forest. I wonder what happens to a Georgia Institute of Technology. Like what happens to Georgia Tech? Those are really interesting historical brands who frankly just don't compete.
Yeah.
They do not compete on the fields and the courts of the ACC. And if the ACC truly melts down, and I think we are getting closer to that, I don't think that's final in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
But if the ACC melts down altogether, I don't know where Boston College ends up. I don't know where Syracuse ends up. I don't know where Wake, Georgia Tech end up because I don't see a lot of brand value there. I think the Big 12 is incredibly they're in a position of leverage. And I think they're attractive to brands like the Virginia schools. I think they're attractive for Louisville. I think it'll be really interesting to see, hey, where does Miami ultimately fall in all of this?
And what's their best fit? Because I think that's another question. Like the obvious inference is, oh, well, if Florida State's going to make the SEC, let's say, then maybe Miami's a Big Ten school and the Big Ten can get into Florida that way. But I'm not so sure that that's the case. I don't know that there's a clear-cut home yet for Miami. Like, obviously, they're
100%,
going
I
to get
agree.
into one of them.
I agree.
But I don't know what the better fit for them is. I think it really is contingent on what Florida State does. And by the way, I'd also like to point out a story flying under the radar. USF trying to get into the SEC after their little stadium meeting they had the other night, I think is really interesting. Like, USF is obviously a second-tier brand, but do brands on the outside looking in, right, at the G5 level, let's say, are those brands also in play to get into these conferences as part of realignment? Because I think if you're sitting on the outside looking in as like a fringe bubble team, this is your only chance. Like, if you don't get in this wave, this next wave, I'm not sure you're getting in for a long time.
Well, I also think we've talked about Notre Dame ad nauseum, and I'll continue to say what I've been told repeatedly. Jack Swarbrick was the Notre Dame voice wanting to keep the ACC affiliation alive, and he retired. And while he is going to be a consultant for Notre Dame, I think that his voice not being the primary athletic voice of reason at Notre Dame makes their position much more unclear. And I think the only conference that Notre Dame joins is the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you look at what we've heard repeatedly and what I've told you guys for months and months, Notre Dame wants to play Michigan on a regular basis. They can't currently do that. The schedule doesn't allow for that. Well, let's fix that by joining the Big Ten. Michigan's a primary target for them. They have a long, respected, standing relationship with Purdue. Everything fits for Notre Dame in the Big Ten. I think that it is not a coincidence that you look up and down the roster of the Big Ten. Notre Dame's got long-standing relationships because of where they are located. They're, as we all know, they're in South Bend, Indiana.
Yeah.
Which is in the heart of Big Ten country. I think you look at the history of Notre Dame football, their biggest games, I don't know, USC perhaps, that's in the Big Ten. Notre Dame is a great fit. And Jack Swarbrick, bless the man, saw an opportunity to solidify Notre Dame's reach with ESPN, yet keep his independence with NBC. And he took it. And I think he did well for Notre Dame. But if this whole thing is going to melt down, Notre Dame's best avenue and their best path to prosperity, which means access to winning national championships, is in the Big Ten, period. And I think the SEC is a very, very valuable conference. It is clearly the power player. But Notre Dame, as a Catholic university, I don't believe sees itself as a fit in the great South of the United States of America.
Agreed.
I think that Notre Dame values its Catholicism, its Catholic roots. I think Notre Dame values its Irish heritage, which is why they would join the Big Ten. And you look across this league, and whether it is theology, cash generating, academic affiliation, which I think Notre Dame values its relationship with Northwestern at a very high level. Northwestern is a prestigious university when it comes to academics, and Notre Dame, whether you know this or not, Notre Dame is incredibly difficult to get into and to achieve at a high level academically. And they take that seriously. It's why they have struggled to recruit at a high level consistently. But I continue to tell you, they value their academics. And it's one of the main reasons that Utah was such a crown jewel of expansion for the Big 12, because Utah is that university that values academics, that values research as a research institution. And you look at the money that comes through that funnel, and I'll continue to say it. And as much as you were right about Stanford not winning on the field, crippling themselves, I think at some point when you look at Notre Dame and you look at some of these other brands and you look at, it's one of the things that's very interesting about the Virginia schools. It is without question that they are very strong academic institutions.
Yes.
And I think the Big 12 is critically aware that their academics are not great. And that adding the Arizona schools, adding universities like BYU, adding universities like Cincinnati, they have raised their academic profile. And if you are able to benefit from the meltdown of the ACC, I don't think there is any question that the leadership of the Big 12 would very much like to raise the bar academically. Those presidents and chancellors would very much like that. And I think there is no question that the Virginia schools do that. Louisville certainly does that. Miami to a lesser extent. I am just very curious to see what is the tipping point for all of this. And I will again tell you, I believe that it is Notre Dame. I think North Carolina has very clearly, and you know, it was interesting yesterday. I was texting with a source of ours. Isn't North Carolina exactly where Utah was in the Pac-12? Because North Carolina's first choice is certainly not to burn down the ACC.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very interesting parallel in comparison.
I think that if you're UNC, much like Utah, you have to walk that line of, hey, we're gonna do so basically we're gonna operate in good faith as long as we can. Meaning, like, our intent is going to be to save the conference and do everything we can do to save the conference while also maintaining our financial footing, both at the on campus, but at the state level as well. Because I'm telling you, that's a huge factor in this conversation. Making sure that UNC continues to help the local economies and continues to have that impact. That's been going on for, you know, however many years now, decades, right? So they care about that. But I would agree that that's a pretty good parallel. Like, we know that Taylor Randall and Mark Harlan and the folks at Utah took it very seriously. They took the Pac-12 to the absolute limit, like trying to save it and find a way to get folks like, you know, Kase at Washington and all these old heads to come around to streaming. And obviously that never worked out, and it forced Utah to go ahead and pull the trigger on the Big 12.
And they stayed as long as they could possibly stay.
Yeah. And so for UNC, you're sitting here saying, okay, well, the ACC is obviously in a different position than the Pac-12 was, right? The Pac-12 grant of rights was expiring. So in the Pac-12, you had this ticking time bomb running out of time. Like, we were about to, you know, get to zeros there. And that's why that pressure ratcheted up, where the ACC is much more of like hey, we've got a couple of unhappy schools, and UNC is sitting here saying, okay, they've kind of forced our hand. Now we got to start making public statements and stuff, which, by the way, I think they've done a good job not talking the last 2 weeks after that little debacle where Bubba Cunningham had to go back to campus and had to do all that. Like, that was kind of a circus, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that region, from what I understand, was sternly spoken with, because I think it put North Carolina in a very odd spot. And I think Bubba Cunningham, as an operator, the athletic director at North Carolina, has done a very good job of back channeling and communicating. And I think a lot of that work was undone. And I think North Carolina and Utah are very interesting in that Utah waited as long as they could possibly wait. They supported their conference because I think we all agreed Utah was in a much better place financially in the Pac-12. Had there been a TV deal, that would not have changed. But now you're in the Big 12. You're making more money. But now I think you'd really like to build a much stronger base and foundation if you're Utah, because I don't think that Utah is in any way, shape, or form leveraged. I think Utah knows that their only next step would be a Super League. They're not – Utah, I think, wanted to join the Big 10. That was never an option for them.
Right.
They're in the Big 12 because that was their best, most comfortable landing spot. North Carolina has leverage that Utah never had, but North Carolina is going to wait as long as they can possibly wait before they make their hand known, because if North Carolina moves, this league falls apart.
Yep.
Without North Carolina and Duke, and I will continue to tell you, the heartbeat of this ACC conference is on Tobacco Road. Without North Carolina and Duke, that conference ceases to exist. And if North Carolina comes out and plays a hand and joins a lawsuit, the conference immediately collapses.
Right.
That's why you have not heard word one from any power player on Chapel Hill, because I think they understand the position they're in, which is very different than Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, I think, is in a position where they fully understand that they have a move left to play, but it's going to be their last move, because there is nothing forcing Notre Dame football to move.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, except the fact that the Big Ten will not take their sports without football. That's a significant asterisk in the Notre Dame Big Ten relationship. Because right now, and you know this, I'm sure, Notre Dame's an independent in football. And what have I been telling you for 2-3 years? There are very few levers that people can pull to make Notre Dame football move to a conference. Do they have access to the national championship? Well, that's been codified in the latest agreement with the college football playoff.
Yep.
Notre Dame's getting paid no matter what. Notre Dame's got access no matter what. Why on earth would they join a conference? Okay. What's the other lever? Scheduling. Well, I mean, if you look at Notre Dame's schedule, and look at that. I just happen to have Notre Dame's schedule.
Wow, Monty.
Just pulled up. We try to give you the information. Notre Dame has absolutely no problem scheduling. And when I say scheduling, I mean big games in big venues where national championship implications are on the line. Here's their schedule. At Texas A&M, big venue, big game, national TV. Northern Illinois at Purdue, Miami of Ohio, Louisville, Stanford, Georgia Tech, Navy, Florida State, Virginia Army at USC.
And that's not even one of their best schedules in recent years.
They have USC national championship game on, is it the first week of the season? It's not. It's November 30th. And what did USC tell the Big Ten before they joined? We're going to play Notre Dame at the end of every season, no matter what. So the USC game now is a massive game, because trust me when I tell you, boosters and supporters at USC have Lincoln Riley on a very short leash.
Mm-hmm.
That's a massive, massive football game in the Coliseum in Los Angeles after Thanksgiving. They don't have trouble scheduling Virginia, Florida State. The Navy game's not going anywhere. Texas A&M. You look at those big brands. Notre Dame's easily getting into the top 12 this year. Because what do you not have? You don't have dummy head coach who can't have 11 guys on the field against Ohio State, right? Because you're going to be busy beating the brakes off of Northern Illinois, Purdue, Miami of Ohio. Stanford's not going to be good this year. Georgia Tech, Navy, Virginia, and Army. They're going to the college football playoff.
And I might point out that, and again, it depends on which Notre Dame team we get. Obviously, some years they're not as good, and other years they're elite. So depending on which Notre Dame team we get, that Florida State game obviously could have massive college football playoff implications. I mean, you're talking about the final quarter of a schedule, and you're playing a team that most definitely is going to be in, the CFP conversation.
And again, I just continue to tell you about Notre Dame. They are a national brand. They recruit in every corner of the country. Their quarterbacks are from Los Angeles. Their linemen are from Ohio and Pennsylvania. Their wide receivers are from Florida and Texas. They can reach anywhere for any player. They are still, to this day, and listen, as a kid who grew up Catholic and is recovering from that, they are still one of the premier religious institutions on the planet.
God bless.
There's just no reason for them to move unless the ACC melts down. Because I think if they have to move their non-football sports, can you imagine Notre Dame going into the Big East? No, I can't. The AAC? No, I can't. They're going to join the Big Ten. And Notre Dame's going to have a significant voice in the direction of this conference.
Well, and obviously Notre Dame's relationship with NBC is, makes the Big Ten a very clear fit.
And the fact that you look at their recruits and you look at their classes year after year after year, even with can't count past 10 guy as their head coach. It's California. It's Florida, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Oregon, the Pacific Islands. You look at where Notre Dame's players come from. You look at the fact that Notre Dame very much allows their kids to do other things. You have four guys, including Faison, playing lacrosse, and they just won the national championship. You have 4 guys on your 2 deep on that lacrosse team winning a national championship. How many universities allow that? Almost none. But Notre Dame gives you that flexibility. NIL, money, they have it all. So this idea that Notre Dame's just going to throw their lacrosse team that just won the fucking national championship into Jimmy's little league down south is not going to happen.
No.
And when they join the Big Ten, they will do it as a full member.
And I just think it's, anybody who would suggest that Notre Dame, would join some low-end conference is just uneducated. I mean, Notre Dame's place in the landscape is very clear.
Yeah.
And they're a premier brand.
Yeah.
They are desired. For all the reasons you just laid out, like it's not in question, where Notre Dame would go. And that's why I say, like, I feel like a big difference between the ACC situation and schools involved in that versus what the Pac-12 thing was, is that there was so much uncertainty about where these schools would go coming out of the Pac-12. Like, obviously, we got to a point where it was like, all right, so we're going to get Oregon and Washington and these schools going here and Utah and yada, yada. Like, we got to that point, but there was probably a 90-day window there where people were like, dude, like, where are these schools going to go? Like, are they going to, form like a mini conference, or like what? Like, are they going to go to the Mountain West, or like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And I feel like in the ACC situation, it's pretty clean cut. Like, you understand the brands that would go to the Big Ten, the brands that would go to the Big 12, and then you've got a couple of schools that I think fall off into the G5 realm.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. The North Carolina and Notre Dame, and I think the Big 12 will ultimately be the big winner if the ACC melts down. But if you're the Big 10 and you end up with Notre Dame and North Carolina, and I think Carolina and Duke are tied at the hip, and if you end up with Stanford, because think about, and I think a lot of people look at Stanford, Cal, and SMU as a huge mistake by the ACC. I don't disagree it's a mistake. Is it a huge mistake? I don't know. SMU certainly hurt the ACC. There's 100%. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
But if you're Cal and Stanford, are you a package deal? Probably not. But if you are, I don't know, UCLA, are you lobbying for Cal to join the Big Ten? Yeah, we want to stop that calimony payment. This bitch needs to get married, man.
Yep.
Right? Like, you need.
Well, and I think for the Big Ten,
you need Cal to get help.
Dude, I think for the Big Ten, obviously they've got some prestigious brands, educationally speaking, in their conference. They do. But I think it's always good. And this is what we've said about Cal and Stanford since the beginning.
Yeah.
They are 2 educational powerhouses, and that's never been in dispute. Nobody's ever said, oh, well, you don't want to go to Stanford for an education. Like, yeah, obviously you do. And I think that the thing is that when you, and this would apply more to Cal than Stanford, because Stanford does have athletic heritage and they've done some great things in athletics.
So does Cal. It was before you were a thing, but so does Cal.
Yeah, I guess my opinion as not someone who was born before the 90s is Cal doesn't have that same level of like Cal,
they don't have David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh,
and they don't have Christian McCaffrey, and they don't have recent success. And so when I look at Cal, my point is that Cal's place currently, until they decide to figure it out athletically in modern day, is as an educational powerhouse that helps you that way, and they can help the Big Ten that way.
But who's the biggest name from Cal in the NFL? Aaron Rodgers?
Probably, yeah.
Aaron
probably.
Rodgers or Jared Goff? Probably.
Yes, I would say so.
The fact that we're using probably and we'd have to guess. I think that if you could get Notre Dame, North Carolina, Duke, Stanford, and Cal, I mean, you're in a different stratosphere at that
you're
point,
golden at that point.
right? And you'll do what you have to do to round out their schedules, but it really helps you with your Pacific arm, with Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA. If you add Cal and Stanford, that's not a reach.
Yeah, and I think if you're the SEC and you're looking at this, that's something that I don't know that I would say the SEC needs to be concerned per se, but I do think it's something you need to pay attention to, because the Big Ten, while they are still number 2 to the SEC, I would say, is slowly closing that gap. If you continue to expand that conference into a more national picture, then that matters. Like that, there's no question that matters.
If that were to happen, the SEC would have to get Miami and Florida State.
Yeah,
I mean, have to. I just don't see any way that
you can't allow the Big Ten to be everywhere and then also have Florida.
And the biggest issue is, at what point do you become bloated if you're the Big Ten? It's a huge problem, but you've put yourself in this position by taking those 4 teams from the West Coast. And it really is, again, and I know we all hate this, but doesn't it come down to the Super League?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of this goes away with the Super League. All of it goes away. Every single detail that we are discussing goes away when the Super League happens.
Yeah.
So that's why I think North Carolina and Notre Dame are in no hurry to melt down the ACC, because I think all of us know where this ultimately is going.
Yeah.
And the consternation, frustration of being in a 57 league team league, like how do you handle 25 to 30 teams in one conference?
I don't know, but I think someone's going to have to figure that
Good
out, because
Lord.
that's what the future is.
I mean, it truly is. It truly is one of those things where you just have to, you're just going to have to figure out what is the best course for you. Is joining the Big Ten for 2 years before a Super League good for anybody?
Well, I think the question would be
Probably not.
So with the Super League, I think there's still questions around conference affiliation. So like Super League is obviously football only, right? Your badminton team doesn't have access to the Super League, right? Like, so if we look at the Super League and we say, okay, a 25 team Big Ten conference obviously has most of its members from a football standpoint in the Super League. So they can afford to be bloated, but I don't know, man. I think there's still a lot of questions around how that would work in totality. Like, it's pretty clear how it would work in football. But if you're these conferences and the Big Ten is 20 plus teams, the Big 12 is like 18, maybe 20 teams.
I think you would be, if the ACC melts down and you add 6 teams. Let's play the what if game.
Yeah.
If you add 6 teams, you're how are you going to schedule badminton? If you add the Virginias, let's say you add the Virginias, Louisville, and Pitt.
Yeah.
Let's say you add those 4 teams. Man, like you're 20 plus at that point. Like, I just don't know. I don't know how you schedule that in your stick and ball sports, in your swimming meets. How many, and the other thing, again, the elephant in the room that we haven't even touched on is what's going to happen with Title IX?
Oh, another great question. Massive unknown.
Because I think that is a big financial impact. And again, I'm in the boat that says, if you're paying NIL back payments, women are included in that.
Yeah.
NIL, it didn't say, well, this is just a lawsuit to cover men. Title IX specifically protects equality for women and really equality for all, but it specifically protects equality for women. And it doesn't say excluding NIL. And it doesn't say excluding the Super League. And it doesn't say, it simply says equality. There are no asterisks. There are no what ifs, ands, and maybes. It protects equality across the board, and that includes NIL lawsuits. So are you really telling me that all of these women that are great basketball players, the Diana Taurasi's of the world, the prolific Skylar Diggins college basketball player, the Caitlin Clark college basketball player from the 90s and 2000s, are you telling me they're not going to get NIL money? Are you telling me they're not going to get revenue sharing? Title IX doesn't have an exception for revenue sharing.
Yeah, you don't just get to skip over the women's side of the game. Like,
I think it's going to be very interesting. You are not in a position where you can just say, well, it's football money, so Title IX doesn't count. It's not how Title IX works, man.
yeah,
That's not how equality works. If you are revenue sharing, share all the revenue. And I think the thing that's so interesting is it's not profit sharing, it's revenue sharing. Those are two very different things.
yes.
Profit sharing and revenue sharing are two different things. So ultimately, I think there's a lot of unknowns here. I think that's why you're not seeing. I think if none of these NIL lawsuits had happened, the ACC would be gone already.
Mm-hmm.
If the Super League wasn't a very good possibility, the ACC would be gone already. Right? But I have no doubt that the Super League is football only, and it impacts very little at the bottom line.
Which
Because I think, and we've had these conversations with people about, again, stick and ball sports is what I always bring up. Baseball and softball make you money. You're on TV. The College World Series starts today in softball.
right.
Texas and OU. Do you think ESPN's putting that on national TV for free? No, it's a revenue generating sport. So stick and ball sports aren't going anywhere. Now, are you also telling me lacrosse, which is on TV and generates revenue, it's not going anywhere? My question is, how many of these sports become club sports? Subsidized, not paid for, subsidized by their university. I think that's a real possibility.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a real possibility. But we'll see. All of this is conjecture, and I think it's a fascinating conversation. And again, if you're just tuning in, I see a bunch of people hopping on the show this morning. We are talking about the ACC and this interesting salvo thrown up by the legislature in North Carolina that has North Carolina lawmakers requiring the state's two biggest and richest athletic departments at UNC Chapel Hill and North Carolina State to regularly play football and basketball games against other in-state universities and each other. And you look at the fact that they are saying sports tourism is vital to the economy of North Carolina. It's a priority for the General Assembly to encourage intrastate collegiate athletic rivalries in order to promote economic development. Well, why would those intrastate rivalries be in jeopardy? Oh, because they're not going to be in the same conference anymore. So, Georgia Technical Institute, Wake Forest, Appalachian State, Charlotte. Charlotte's a great athletic brand. Whether you want to talk about it or not, their basketball program's phenomenal. How much damage is done if UNC and NC State join different leagues?
A lot.
How much? And I know we don't talk about this, but how much damage is done to NC State when they join separate leagues? A lot. I think a lot. We need that drop from 21. A lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot. I think NC State is... I don't think NC State is a massive brand. I don't think NC State is anything more than Jim Valvano running around in his blazer after an unbelievable tip-in. That's what I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a football brand. It's a basketball brand, which is fine. North Carolina's not a football brand. It's a basketball brand. Oh, wait, they just had the, Drake May, pick number 3? So you're putting Mitch Trubisky, fucking asshole. You're putting Mitch Trubisky in the NFL draft. You're putting quarterbacks at the top of the NFL draft. maybe you are a football brand.
Yeah.
NC State is not. NC State's not. And I am curious, and I know NC State fans always get belligerent.
Monty, come on.
No, Monties. Hey, Monty. No, hey, Monties. North Carolina State's not a great athletic brand. Sorry. They're not. Anybody like, man, I got to watch that NC State game. No, me either. That's just the hard truth. They're damaged the moment they leave the ACC because they're not a secondary brand. They're like a third-tier brand in any conference they join. They're a fucking third-tier brand now.
Yeah,
in the ACC. Let's not forget that. Again, North Carolina and Duke run that league, and where they go, I think the ACC follows.
Yes.
So if they leave, I think the ACC falls apart. With all due respect, please, Seminole fan, don't lose your mind in the comment section. Well, you're going to anyway.
Right.
But with all due respect.
Yeah.
Respect.
Okay, less of us, more of you. The comment section on the Monty Show presented by Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports brand. Very interesting that we get the NBA Finals starting tomorrow. The Stanley Cup Finals starting Saturday. Oh, Monty, you know how far it is from your mom's house to South Florida?
We show up.
We have airplanes. Why does it matter how far Edmonton is to South Florida? If I see one more graphic on SportsCenter, oh, look at this, man. Wow. The earth is flat. It's the shortest point between two, the shortest distance. It's geometry. Fuck it. My point is, I'm tired of hearing
triangles.
but man, it's Edmonton. And holy shit, it's far. Okay, don't go. Don't play the series then. Can't afford the jet fuel. We get the Stanley Cup Finals starting Saturday. We get the NBA Finals starting tomorrow. Oh, Monty, Kristaps Porzingis is back. We're saved. No, you're not. You're going to win the series anyway. But my point is, never a better time to download the Prize Picks app than right now, today. We've also got the Colonial going on this weekend, one of the signature events in Galf.
No Monties.
No Monties. Monty. No Monties. Which is different than Del Monte. Use the promo code Monty to get 100% deposit matching at Prize Picks, which very simply means you put in $5, they'll give you $5 more. You guys, you can play for a month on $20. Put in 10, they'll give you 10 more. Win your money. I keep telling you, and the guys at Prize Picks probably don't love the fact I say this, but it's not hard to win money on Prize. Well, if you're Jake, it's not hard to win money on Prize Picks. It truly is not. Less or more. Less or more. How many times has Jake had sex? 0. Less or more. Less.
No.
Done. You won.